Hi, I'm Eliot from Magoosh, and in this video, we're going to think about the second part of your speaking test, right? Part 2, where you have a monologue answer, where you have to give a short speech. And this is one of the sections of the test where it really benefits you to have a really clear plan ahead of time, right? Thinking through how you're going to respond to this question, because you can use that plan every time. Even though the prompts are going to be a little bit different on each of the speaking tests, you can use the same approach. And so my advice is to develop an approach, understand it, and use it every time. Okay, now, an important part of the plan is to really use the 1 minute you have to prepare your response really effectively. Okay, 1 minute is not a lot of time to think about how you want to respond to what is actually really a long prompt that they're asking you to respond to, right? Every part 2 prompt has a couple of bullet points and then something at the end that you're supposed to provide a longer response to. So you have to really have a clear plan in place about how you're going to organize that 1 minute you have to prepare your response. Okay, let's break it into 2 parts. So the first part of the prompt are really the easy background questions, right? The bullet points that ask you simply to provide some very simple and basic information. My advice to students is to read over those bullet points during the 1 minute time frame that you have to prepare, but you should not spend a lot of time thinking about them and planning what you're going to say about them. It's because the responses are so simple and clear, right? You're just providing factual information. It's kind of a waste of time to plan out your responses to those because it's such simple information. You can, in fact, when you're responding, when you're actually giving your monologue, it's perfectly fine for those first bullet points to give 1 or 2 sentences in response to each one, go through them from top to bottom, and just move on to the second part of your prompt, which is actually the more complicated one. Okay, so at the bottom of every part 2 prompt, you then have a more open-ended question. And in your 1 minute, this is the part that I recommend to my students that they spend much more time planning for and focusing on in their 1 minute preparation time. So the more open-ended question might be something where you have to provide a main point or 2 about the topic that's been provided to you. Use your time to think about exactly what you want to say. What are your main points going to be? And even think through examples, right? Don't write out full sentences. Don't write out long information, a lot of information on your notes. Just simply make a simple plan about what your main points are going to be and some shorter notes about what you might say about each of those points, examples or details. So let's think about an example. A typical part 2 or section 2 prompt on the listening test would be something like, you're supposed to talk about a great class that you took in school. Okay, that might be the topic of the prompt. So the bullet points might be, what was the topic of the class? Who taught the class? Okay, what is something that you learned in the class? That could be another bullet point in that first part, okay? But then at the bottom of the prompt, the very last point you're supposed to respond to might be something like, and you're supposed to explain why the class was so good, okay? So those first bullet points, you can provide some simple information, a sentence or 2. But then the last one, the one where they ask you, okay, explain something. Why was the class so good? You need to come up with at least 2 points there with details, okay? So maybe you took a history class, right? And one reason the class was so good was because the teacher connected past events to current events, right? To trying to draw lines between what happened in the past and today, right? You could talk about that in depth, okay? As one of your main points before you move on. Right? As you're planning your response, it's those final points that you should focus on because they require more from you, more information, more language, more time, especially in your planning, in your 1 minute planning period in order to think about what you want to say for each one. So if you want to learn more about part 2 of the speaking test and the other parts 1 and 3, we've got a great resource for you. If you look in the description below, we've got a complete guide to the IELTS speaking section, which has all kinds of good information about what's on the test, what kinds of things you should do to study for it, and some other ideas for resources you can use to help prepare for this difficult section of the IELTS. And if you like this video, you can also check out these other videos where we talk about other things related to the IELTS that are going to be really helpful for you as you're studying for the test.